So we're in the second week of a series that focuses upon Jesus as the path to life. And in today's gospel, on today's feast day, this path to life, I think, seems deceptively simple. It really boils down to whether we're willing to follow Christ the King or not. But maybe it's not quite so simple. On the face of it, the gospel today presents to us two kings and two kingdoms. In the scene, Jesus stands captive before Pilate. He's been arrested, he's been beaten around a bit, and there's worse, of course, to follow. Jesus is wearing a simple robe, and he's all alone. Pilate, on the other hand, is Caesar, the Roman emperor's representative in Judea. As far as Pilate's concerned, the only king that matters is Caesar. And whatever puppet king Caesar has installed, in this case, it's Herod. Pilate's clearly in charge. He's wearing the robes that signify his authority, and he's the one interrogating Jesus. So we seem to have here two claimants for a throne, the throne of Judea. Pilate wants to know if Jesus is really a threat to Caesar, although of course it hardly looks like it now, as Jesus stands in chains before him. So Pilate's crucial question, the key question that he asks Jesus at this point is, "Are you the King of the Jews?" And Jesus replies by saying, "It's you who say it." Jesus isn't being slippery here. He's not avoiding a direct answer. It's because Pilate's concept of a king is that of a possible rival to his boss, to Caesar, in this part of the world. And so Jesus will go on to say, well, I am a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, my kingdom is not in this world. He says it's not of or from this world. Jesus' kingdom is present here on earth, but it's not from this world, and it's not a kingdom of this world because it comes from God. Pilate cannot imagine this. He can only conceive of worldly power and authority. And so Pilate tries to clarify. So you are a king then? I want you to pay very careful attention to what happens next. Jesus' response here is yes, and he goes on to explain to Pilate a fundamental feature of his kingdom. That is, that it's the kingdom of truth. Jesus says that he came to testify to the truth, and that everyone who belongs to the truth listens to Jesus' voice. I said at the beginning that it seems like there are two rivals for a throne in this passage, Jesus and Caesar. But now we see that the choice is not between two earthly kings. Instead, there's a cosmic choice, a decision between a kingdom of truth and a kingdom of lies, between good and evil, between light and darkness. It's not a choice between Jesus and Caesar, but between Jesus and the devil. Caesar, Pilate, Herod, the various political forces that come together to conspire against Jesus are the unwitting, but at the same time, still real collaborators with evil that kill the innocent one. When we put it like that, the choice doesn't seem like much of a choice, does it? If it is between good and evil, between light and darkness, Jesus or Satan, well, of course we're going to choose Jesus, aren't we? But of course, it's not in fact so simple. First of all, let's note that some people today do consciously choose darkness. But it's even more complicated than that. There's a meditation from one of the great spiritual masters that can help us here. St Ignatius of Loyola invites us to imagine two kingdoms. In one, Satan sits on a throne of fire and smoke and sends his demons to convert the world to his kingdom of lies. Ignatius says that the enemy's strategy is this. Firstly, to encourage people to crave wealth or to hoard it when they've accumulated it. And then to encourage them to look for worldly honour and recognition in the light of what they've accumulated. And that culminates in number 3, in pride, which is the love of self to the exclusion of others. If we're honest, then I think we have to actually acknowledge the power of these temptations. We do want material possessions, and we like it when people envy what we have, when they're deferential to us, when people admire and are perhaps even jealous of us. The pride that results here is not really that subtle. It's the feeling of autonomy and independence, that I get to decide the rules of the game. I don't need God, and I can decide for myself what's right and what's wrong. All in the name, ultimately, of doing what I want. Once we give in to greed and pride, says St Ignatius, then the door in our lives is open to all the other vices, to wrath, to gluttony, to sloth, to envy, and to lust. In St Ignatius's meditation, Jesus' kingdom looks very, very different. Jesus is standing on a humble plain with his disciples gathered around him. Jesus sends his disciples into the world as well, and he gives them a threefold strategy to present to others. Firstly, his disciples are to talk about the need for spiritual poverty. This means not looking to wealth or possessions for security, but looking instead to God. Whatever possessions we do have are only to be used to help us draw closer to God. Some too will be called to material poverty as well, because that's to imitate Jesus, who did not have anything to lay his head upon. Secondly, the followers of Jesus are to desire the insults and contempt that the world throws at the followers of Jesus. It's one thing to humbly bear the all too common insults and contempt we can get from people at work, amongst our friends, or possibly even from family members when we own up to being Catholic today. But St Ignatius actually tells us to desire such insults. That seems masochistic on the face of things. But the reason is that if we're not on the receiving end of that from time to time, then our Christian faith must be submerged. It's got to be hidden, clearly not obvious to others. It's not animating our decisions because no one can tell that we're living by a different set of values. The insults and contempt of those who hate Christ and faith is a clear sign that we are living by the standards of Jesus and not of the world. Remember, if we truly desire insults and contempt because of our faith, then our response when those moments happen will not be to meet fire with fire, but to meet fire with love, with respect, with care. There's no place for retaliation or even anger in those moments. And this leads us to the third step that the followers of Jesus are to take on, according to St Ignatius, and that is to prize and to seek to be humble. Humility is not being a doormat, but it's rather seeing ourselves as we truly are. This means that we know that we're not the centre of our own universe, that we're not the king or queen of our own lives, but rather Jesus is truly king. When we're humble, we are led to live all the other virtues, especially the virtues of faith, of hope, and of love. St Ignatius asks us to consider which banner, which standard we will fight under. Who do we belong to? Will we align ourselves with the devil? Will we collude with the world and convert others to the kingdom of lies? Or will we choose Christ's uncomfortable way of spiritual poverty, of insults and contempt, and being humble, so as to lead others into the kingdom of truth? It is a stark choice, but I hope by now it's obvious that the devil's strategy is subtle. And we, I very much include myself here, can fall for the desire for riches. We can desire and look for honour, and so fall into pride. Even as we profess ourselves to be followers of Christ. This is actually a choice that we need to make again and again in our lives. It's not once and done. But I do want to say that not to choose is to choose. Not to make a decision is to go with the dominant forces in our world that aren't aligned with Jesus and his kingdom. We can't sit on the fence with this one. Jesus is the true King of the world, and we need to decide whether we belong to the truth, whether we're prepared to acknowledge him as King or not. And that brings us today to the Christ the King challenge. So for some years now, it used to be on the Feast of Pentecost, now on the Feast of Christ the King, we invite people who, over the last 12 months, in the language of today, have sought to choose the path of life, who've decided that Christ is their King, who've wanted to become committed followers of Jesus. Part of this, the origin of it, is that we baptise adults at the Easter Vigil, and at that moment, adults come forward and they say very publicly, I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm committing my life to him today, and they're baptised. But for us who are what we sometimes might call cradle Catholics, those of us who were baptised when we were babies, if we embrace our faith more deeply, if we decide that we want to follow Jesus more closely later on, there's no such moment. It's just that you start looking a bit more faith-filled and you start trying to do a few things differently. But there's no acknowledgement of that really in and through our church's sacraments as such. And so we do want to acknowledge that here in the parish. So every year for about 6 years now, we've invited people to do this. What does it look like? It means that if in the last 12 months or so, you've made a decision where you've gone, I want to take my faith more seriously. I want to follow the Lord more closely. And that might look like, I want to be more consistent at Mass, or I want to pray more regularly in my life outside of church. Or it looks like I'm trying to make decisions based upon my faith, letting my conviction about Jesus shape the decisions I make, whether that's about my future career, those sorts of decisions, or whether it's moral decisions about choosing the right thing and saying no to the wrong thing. They're the kinds of things that look like somebody saying, who as a baby perhaps, or as a young person was baptised, saying, actually now I'm taking hold of this in a deeper way for myself. So if that's you, if over the last 12 months or so, that's a decision that you've made in some way where you've sought to do that, what I'd like to invite you to do is to be really courageous and to come down the front. And part of that is so that we can affirm you for that decision, because we want to say we support you in it. Our parish is geared and designed to try and encourage you to deepen and grow in your faith. So to come down the front so we can acknowledge that, and I just want to pray a simple prayer for you. So to make this a little bit easier, because it can be a bit scary, especially being the first person, I'm going to invite you all just to close your eyes for a moment. And if that's you, if as you've perhaps prayed about this over the last week or reflected upon it, this is you want to acknowledge that you've made that deeper decision, I'd like to invite you to come down the front now.